CodeX group meeting, November 12th. We have three fantastic presentations for you all today. We have Mark Lauritsen, who has been a friend of our center for many years. He will discuss the Joyce Boxer project, which is a project he's been working on with Suffolk Law School. Then we have Paul Swagel. He's the founder of the Business Law Seminar Group, who works a lot with early stage startups and who will tell us about key legal issues in fundraising for legal tech startups. And then we have Stuart Farmer, who's the CEO of Lambton, which is basically an application that allows people to deploy their own software to on a blockchain and create smart contracts. So we have an hour for this meeting, so I would ask all the speakers to perhaps confine their remarks to about 10 minutes and leave about the same amount of time to discussion with the group. And folks, everyone who's joining, if you have questions, you can share them in the chat or just unmute yourself. So with that, I'll just turn it over to Mark. Mark, are you there?
I am here.
Wonderful. It's great to have you, Mark. Good to see you.
Likewise.
I'll just I'll turn it over to you.
Cool. Okay. Hi, everybody. Thank you, Susan. Thank you, Roland. This is a reprise of a talk I gave for the Society of Computers and Law last month. It's got kind of a Halloween theme, tools for witch hunting. And it only took 10 minutes when I did it. I'm going to go a little slower, but not much slower. So apologies if it seems really fast. Hopefully it'll stimulate some interest. So basically, I want to talk about how we as lawyers and clients and other humans are constantly finding ourselves making choices. That's kind of the core of what we do. But oddly enough, we don't really use technology very well to do those things. And the question is, can we do better? So this is me. My day job is working with Capstone Practice Systems, mostly building expert systems and document automation environments. I have a side company called All About Choice, which is probably the slowest startup in the world, and a book called Working Smarter with Knowledge Tools, which is coming out in the second edition this winter. So these are some of the kinds of choices we face. Some of them are substantive in terms of our actual practice, the legal problems we are in or helping other people with. Some are business decisions about who we hire, HR, what technologies we use, but we're constantly faced with this barrage of choices. And I think, as most of you know, making good decisions is not straightforward. There are all kinds of cognitive and emotional pitfalls along the way, and we are in trouble most of the time in making them very well. Like other humans, we make decisions by gathering information, by writing things on yellow pads, talking to our friends, maybe having group meetings, writing long memos justifying one choice or another, sometimes just rolling a dice or flipping a coin to make a choice. Often we end up formulating options in kind of a consumer's report style. This is a document from the Project Pericles at Harvard back in the mid-'80s when we were deciding on a word processor. And in those days, one of the differentiators was, can it center text? So things have changed a little bit. We now have modern word processors that can make these nice tables, so we can organize our thinking about choices. This was choosing a case management system for a law school clinic. But the underlying challenges of making the choices are about the same. You can step it up and go to a spreadsheet model and do some mathematics and thresholds and weighted factoring, add things up to make it a little bit more technological. But even here, I think most would agree, it doesn't get to the crux of the issue, which is how do we weigh and balance these conflicting perspectives? So the question is, what about other technologies we might use? We know about databases and document automation, expert systems, and modern AI, deep learning. So databases, of course, are great for giving us data, not just numbers and text, but all kinds of rich media that can often be helpful in making a choice. A document assembly system can create a custom document or provide an interactive experience that can apply decision rules and guide somebody through a process, provide some individual guidance along the way. Expert systems can do the same thing and more effectively by having this ability to encode knowledge non-procedurally and to reason using backward and forward chaining techniques. And again, these are good at offering explanations as well as answers. And the latest AI, in terms of deep learning technologies, et cetera, take it even further. The big deficit I think we all understand here is that they're not particularly good at explanation. They tend to be somewhat inscrutable, and often the desire for explanations is critical for making a choice. So none of these technologies, from my point of view, are particularly good at helping people make choices, because choices involve competing values and perspectives. They're not algorithmic. You can't look up or compute the answer to a choice. A choice involves balances. It involves being torn in different directions, being pulled by different considerations, and different people weigh those considerations differently. Behind the scenes, of course, you could put this into some very fancy linear mathematics to understand how all the different factors might apply, especially when you have a multiple person decision scenario. But what I was hoping maybe 15 years ago when I started really focusing on this is, can we come up with a simplified metaphor that allows us to capture the key ingredients involved in any kind of a choice? And I found myself gravitating to this idea of a three-dimensional spreadsheet. The example here is a startup choosing a law firm, right? So you have several founders, you've got several firms you're being considered, you have factors that differentiate them. The founders may disagree both about how they evaluate the choices and also how they weigh the different considerations. One may be much more cost sensitive, another may be much more focused on the chemistry with the attorneys. So I extracted that into an underlying geometry, which I think which does capture the key dimensions involved in making any kind of a choice, where the columns are the options you're facing, the rows are factors and considerations, and the layers are valuative perspectives, one or more people looking at the same problem. And so you can apply that to the law firm situation, or in a consumer context, choosing an apartment, right? So we have John and Jane here choosing among 3 apartments. I've simplified it, but we're concerned about the overall space, the quality of the view, and the location. And some of these things are subjective, and John and Jane may differ. And so you can take this conceptual model and explode it along different axes to look at how Jane and John look at it separately, how you can combine their particular perspectives. You can look at it one option at a time. You can look at it at one factor at a time. The next step is to say, all right, we've got this 3-dimensional grid that's capturing the different aspects of this choice. In each of these internal cells, there's a decision. There's a formulation of the relative value, the relative goodness of this option on this factor from this perspective. So these little green nuggets of goodness are in this model. And they're as high as the factor is important. They're as wide as the option is relatively good compared to other options. And they are as deep as the evaluative perspective is entitled to weight. So it really is designed to capture those 3 key aspects. To continue the metaphor, the idea is you can take these little nuggets of goodness and melt them down. At the top, you've got sort of the total goodness. Over all things considered, how does this option rank given what people care and how much they care about it? Going back for a second to a spreadsheet model, here you're trying to decide whether to treat a team member as an employee or as a contractor. And so you're evaluating this person using criteria such as the ones the IRS may use. And you can do this through a spreadsheet, of course. It lends itself to this kind of numerical approach. But I think many of us prefer to see it graphically. What if we can express this concept in an interactive visualization that lets you see the relative goodness and the relative importance of factors from different perspectives expressed in a visualization that you can directly manipulate? Back to the apartment example, and this is a way to think of that. You've got this, again, this grid that captures the key evaluations going on, and they're melted down into these cylinders of overall utility at the top, where you can combine in different perspectives. This also applies to things like negotiating a contract or a deal, how you allocate questions about number of board seats, et cetera, in a prospective deal. I'm not going to dwell on these examples, but I wanted to give you the flavor. I've written a couple peer review articles about this general idea, which you're welcome to look up and read. I teach a course at Suffolk Law School, as Roland mentioned, on decision-making and choice management, where I have students build applications that help people make choices, both lawyers and clients and other professionals, using a whole wide variety of technologies, just getting to the question of how do we make good choices and to what extent can technology help us? And can we get beyond the algorithmic, data-driven, rule-based approach, which seems to be one we're stuck in for a lot of applications. I formed this side company called All About Choice. Our website is choiceboxer.com. It's got a quite primitive, a basic MVP that captures the dynamics of this model. So you can apply it to choosing an expert system platform. This is one person's perspective, choosing among them given what he or she cares about and how much, represented by the height of these boxes. And then you got another perspective where they see things differently and they come up with a different overall ranking. You can also apply this to group decision making, which I think is where it's most powerful. This is with the Legal Services Corporation used our technology with about 35 judges and lawyers and technologists to help decide how to allocate the overall federal spend for support for innovation in legal services delivery through technology. So getting close to the end here, these are my takeaways. I would argue that choosing well is really central and helping others to choose well. And we don't do as good a job at it as we could. We certainly don't make as good use of technology as we might. Yet choices involve these predictable sets of options, considerations, and evaluations that could be captured and bundled up and expressed and bottled up in some forms of technology. They can be stored, they can be reused, they can be refined. And this all will help manage complexity, which I think is one of the biggest challenges when we try to make good choices, especially as groups. So a very oversimplified view of computing history, I think it's fair to say that in classical computing, the attempt to express the kind of knowledge needed behind choices tends to run into problems of procedural coding, which means expense and brittleness. In the first wave of AI, symbolic reasoning, you can have more power, but again, you're limited by the expressiveness because you're talking about rules. And as I tried to argue earlier, rules don't really capture the fundamental dynamics of choices. And in the latest AI, machine learning and et cetera, deep learning, greater power in many ways, but opaque to most human attention. So I think for decision support, we really need something that can express human concerns in a way that's participatory for people, that's transparent, auditable, explainable, and ideally supporting collective intelligence and various forms of social production. So my aspiration for this choice box model and some future much better implementation of it is that it's a prism through which we can take this white noise of ideas and information that comes at us when we face a choice, individually or as a group, and turn it into an organized spectrum of actionable information. There are a couple articles referenced here. I'm happy to share these slides or any of these materials. You can reach me at capstonepractice.com. And very quickly, I have two final slides that weren't originally in the talk. This is a current interest of mine, which is how do we productize decisional expertise? I think the kind of thing I've shown you can be very useful in the hand of an advisor as a tool for conversation. And it can be used collaboratively by an advisor and an advisee, a lawyer and a client or other professional client. But as you move to the product side of the spectrum, how do you turn these kinds of things into products where they're delivered without synchronous interaction with some expert? And can you even at some point have standalone decision support tools that do a good job of eliciting the factors that are involved? I'm joining a small group that's launching a course in which I hope to explore this called exponential.legal. This is going to be coming visible next week. And the idea is to have an online course about productization of legal expertise across a whole different approaches. And one of them is this idea of decision support. So if I haven't lost my breath entirely, that's what I want to say. And I'm happy to react to questions or move on to our next part of this.
Great. Thank you so much, Mark. This is super interesting. The first question is from Yong-Sin, who's asking multidimensional weighting, question mark.
Yeah, I think you can definitely, I mean, you certainly weight things on a given perspective. One option is more important than another. And you can weight things across perspectives, different different opinion givers may be entitled to more weight. You know, a managing partner may be entitled to more weight in choosing a CIO than an associate, for instance.
Mm-hmm. Can I ask you, what's your okay, so Shugam is asking, who is the investors for ChoiceBoxer?
No investor. It's all self-funded so far. We've had a couple small engagements that have provide revenue, but we are pre-funding. As I say, a very slowly moving startup. I do, you know, personally, as you may be able to tell, I'm totally enthusiastic about this idea, but the world hasn't yet come to our doorstep, and we haven't really achieved any meaningful traction.
If you say you have some initial deployments or use cases, can you share some of that?
Yeah, the one I mentioned at the Legal Services Corporation was probably the most satisfying. We have a case study about that, but that was used by a couple dozen lawyers and judges and technologists to rank alternative strategies for funding innovation in legal services across about a dozen factors. So it was a very satisfying demonstration of the utility and the usefulness of this. We've used it with a small group at the Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court for a Justice for All project, trying to choose among student applications for pilot projects. And I've used the concept at Microsoft and other engagements where I help clients think about alternatives, whether they're trying to select policy or to select technology.
Interesting. So I think that answered Shugam's question about client bases. And Dennis is asking, would you explain how Tom and Jane tell which apartment wins?
Well, in the particular model there, I guess they would see, given if their perspectives are equally weighted, which they ordinarily should be in a relationship, they can see the combination of their ratings in those totaling boxes. I don't have time to bring it up interactively, but that's the basic concept. So you would share this visualization. You would enter your evaluation of the apartments and your weightings of the factors, and see the shapes that arise, and then see the combinations, which is really a simple matter of geometry.
And so I think it could also be potentially useful to like customers of legal tech that are facing a choice between n number of contract analytics systems.
Exactly.
And this might be a good application for that.
One of my very first use cases was choosing a document assembly product. And as we know, we have more document assembly platform options than ever. And the choices are quite complex and a lot of trade-offs that are painful, but doable. So I agree, that's an important use case.
Mm-hmm. So the next question is from L.A. Pritchard. Are there ways to prevent participants from gaming the system?
Yeah, not really. I think these things are to some degree inevitably gameable. The hope is that by making the gaming much more visible, you can see when gaming is happening, and potentially you can structure it so people don't see each other's perspectives until there's a later point of the process. So you can structure deliberations to minimize the effect of gaming. And if you allocate everybody the same amount of input on a choice, by definition, their impact on the choice can be limited.
Got it. Okay. Are there any additional questions? Could this be used for negotiation also, potentially?
Yep, exactly. Unlike the man with the hammer, I think it can be used anywhere. One of the papers I referenced was exactly upon that, because I think it does represent a tool through which parties can explore the asymmetric preferences that you find in a negotiation context and discover opportunities for a win-win solution where both parties get more than they would had they gotten everything they thought they wanted when they started.
Right. Yeah, no, I think that's so. I mean, it seems like a tool that might even, yeah, like you put it, like you make explicit the you force the parties or the users to make the different preferences more explicit, or at least to think about it and then visualize it even. When,
Exactly.
like you said,
Right.
there's so many things that we don't even think about that go into our decisions, and that some of which might not really lead us to a really optimal decision that we want as an outcome.
Absolutely. The idea that just externalizing your thinking about preferences is a healthy process, especially across a team.
Right. So Shugam has another question. What tech is used to develop it, front end and back end?
We've built a number of prototypes. The current online prototype is Ruby on Rails. It's pretty straight, it's pretty basic stuff. My dream is to have a game-like immersive environment that really feels three-dimensional. But we're going to require some pretty sophisticated tech to do that, and also some funding. So right now we're just sort of playing around with prototypes and proving the concept, we hope, in principle.
Cool. It's great. Well, hopefully there's some potential investors on this Zoom today, and maybe you'll connect with somebody who could help you with that. So,
cool.
well, great. Well, so thank you so much, Mark. It's great to see you. Thank you for sharing the Joyce Box's story with us, and please keep us posted. And if you could perhaps put your email address again into the chat so that people could reach out if they have additional questions, that'd be great. All right, so quick round of virtual applause for you, Mark. Thank you so much for joining us today. And yes, the other folks are joining in too in the applause, and I see already Paul, who's joining us. Paul, where are you joining us from?
I am in Seattle, Washington.
That's right. Good to see you, Paul. And this might be a good segue to you talking about early stage startups and some of the do's and don'ts from a startup lawyer for legal techs. I think that that's what we're excited to learn from you.
Excellent. And can you see my screen that I've shared?
Yes, we can, sir. Thank you.
Excellent. So honored to be here, Mark. That was very interesting. Thank you. I have been an attorney for about 32 years, and I have been general counsel of 13 startups and 14 as of Monday when I start in-house as GC and secretary of a telehealth startup. My contact information is on this screen. I'm easy to find on LinkedIn and Twitter. I have a blog called startupgc.us at that URL that you might find interesting. I won't dwell on this. I'm going to move quickly. I have, before jumping into startups, I had kind of a more stuffy, stodgy career in big government, big law, big corporations. Worked at the SEC. I was a former special assistant United States attorney for the Department of Justice. And in 2020, I jumped into the startup world. Spent 10 years at a company called ShareBuilder, which we sold twice. And I've been general counsel, in-house general counsel at all of these companies. The one at the end is the one I'm starting at Monday, CareXM. In most of these, I've been a fractional or part-time general counsel. And just throwing that out right now, on that blog, startupgc.us, I have given away all my trade secrets to lawyers who want to be part-time in-house general counsel. And I've given the pros and cons of this relationship publicly so that startups can think about how to close their legal resources gap. So I work for a number of startups as their in-house general counsel, and essentially I charge less because I give them less of my time. And so it's one way of closing the legal resources gap, which is a problem for startups. On this slide, you can see the well-known, I think, metric that 88 to about 90% of startups fail. And the number one reason they fail is product market fit or lack thereof. They're not selling something that the market is buying, and so they're not producing revenues. And the number two reason is running out of money. So one, if you're not generating revenues because you have poor market product fit, that is one reason you're going to run out of money. But there's also sort of, the interrelationship that the the startups that have the most success raising money are the ones with good product market fit and are generating a history of revenue earnings potential. But that said, some companies with strong product market fit run out of money. Why? Because they're bad at fundraising. So those two go back and forth quite a bit. And then legal, governance, and regulatory mistakes and poor fundraising often contribute to cash issues. So I like to think of startups a little bit as kind of like a biological system. It's the product and the innovation, the idea is sort of the heart, the lungs, the soul, the brains of the startup, and the generation of revenues and the ability to raise money is sort of the oxygen and the nutrition that enables the product to get to market, to be designed, to be delivered, to be marketed and sold. The structural aspects of the startup are its skeletal structure, essentially, and its epidermis, its skin, the legal, governance, and regulatory kind of compliance best practices that give it the structure to sign contracts, give it the structure to raise money, but create the skin and the organs to keep out disease, illness, problems, lawsuits, regulatory actions, customer complaints, product recalls. And so thinking of it as essentially a biological system is helpful to think about, a way of looking at startups and understanding the importance of good legal governance and regulatory foundations. They all interrelate. I get a lot of calls from startups and from lawyers for startups, and they're constantly bringing me their injured startups and their broken startups. And they say, "Oh, I hear you're good at fixing startups." And I got so many of those calls that I finally formed this company on the side, Business Law Seminar Group. And the idea was that I would travel around the country and give these basic foundational concepts of forming on a solid foundation, avoiding common legal and regulatory mistakes, and fundraising successfully. And fundraising successfully is important. It means raising the right amount of money at the right intervals from the right investors on the right terms. So I've been on a bit of a crusade to sort of teach these things. One of the first things that I got done was finishing a book called Contract Drafting and Negotiation for Entrepreneurs and Business Professionals, because it's important when you sign contracts, one, that they don't blow up, but two, that they produce the kind of revenue that they're able to produce to optimize the commercial relationship you're talking about. Then I finished my book, Startup Law and Fundraising, which is more about, it's almost 600 pages. It has 51 startup case studies in it. And it really goes through everything I talked about in my talks across the country and more. I also have become an adjunct law professor teaching the exact same course, which at Seattle U School of Law I call Counseling Startups, Law, Regulation, and Fundraising. And I'm finishing my third book, Careers in the Law, in the middle of 2021. And that will cover a lot of legal tech and technology, opportunities across every area of law and areas of law that might be negatively impacted. I use a variety of legal tech in my day-to-day work across my many companies. I am currently general counsel to several companies, and I also work as of counsel through a law firm where I have another dozen companies. And so through those efforts with my clients, I use a lot of legal tech. I'm not the most deep in legal tech, but you can see I use it on a day-to-day basis. In getting ready for this talk, I listened to about 30 podcasts. I read probably 30 articles, and maybe more importantly, I talked to about 15 legal tech entrepreneurs and legal tech experts and commentators. And here's a few trends that I think are just worth being aware of and maybe talking about. There has been a historical VC, venture capital, reluctance to invest in legal tech, and that has given away, been eroding since 2018, where VCs are more and more interested in legal tech. So that's a very good sign. And private equity firms have been very active, more at the exit end maybe than at the beginning funding end, but the exit end, buying legal tech firms and taking them over and taking them to the next level and combining them with other legal tech firms to create synergies. There are some very serious tailwinds pushing legal tech forward. And one is the remote work and remote commerce trends that we're all aware of. That is driving legal tech in a positive direction. Another thing about my background that is relevant here is that I just finished 3 years on the Board of Governors of the Washington State Bar Association. So I have been deep in looking at the rules and regulations that have essentially been impeding legal tech. Those are rules around unlicensed practice of law, the prohibition of non-lawyers from investing and owning financial interests in law firms, the prohibition against lawyers sharing fees with non-lawyers, and very restrictive advertising. It is worth noting that these barriers are breaking down, they're eroding. I think most of you are aware of what's going on in Utah, which has created a regulatory sandbox for 2 years to just kind of let legal tech loose. Washington has a consent order with LegalZoom that allows them to operate in Washington, and Arizona has reduced the prohibitions against non-lawyers receiving fees from lawyers or taking financial interest in law firms. And others are gradually, quietly reducing advertising restrictions. So these are all favorable regulatory developments. COVID has hurt law firms, but that has probably been a wake-up call for law firms that they need to be more efficient in the delivery of legal services. And corporate law departments, like the ones that I'm in, are increasingly turning to legal tech to facilitate remote work and to become more efficient because legal fees at law firms continue to rise. Obviously, consumers are continually increasing their use of legal tech, and COVID-19 has increased that. There have been successes and there have been failures in legal tech. Atrium was an AI-driven law firm that took in $65 million, and that folded up a few months ago. It probably was an idea that was just a few years too early, maybe. But there's also been high-profile successes on the fundraising front. You can go to Crunchbase and you can get a 1-week free trial, and you can kick around in there and see legal tech companies raising money and who they're raising money from. That is a very important tool that you should all be familiar with. I also see that there's a mainstreaming of legal tech. I'm seeing Clio advertising across every channel of advertising, and that is a brand new thing and very supportive. There are some that think there might be a legal tech bubble that is growing because there's so many companies putting out contract, management platforms and law firm management platforms. But looking at everything I've looked at and listening to commentators, I don't think that's really an issue. Another thing I did, as I said, was I talked to a bunch of legal tech founders. And again, I look at the health of any startup as a holistic enterprise, and the design of legal tech, the delivery of legal tech, the monetization of it, the stickiness of it, the reduction of churn, and the post-sale success of legal tech into different environments is very important, pardon me, for the success of legal tech, so that they have money to grow, so they have money to manage legal and regulatory issues, and so that they're appealing to both investors and to acquirers. Mauro Jr. In Brazil, he's a legal designer and legal tech specialist, had this comment. Something I noticed in legal tech is how important design is, especially if the solution is built to be used by lawyers. Lawyers in general are not tech savvy, and if the application requires a lot of clicks, configurations, and settings, the startup will probably face an engagement problem. Kelly Corey spent a bunch of time with me on the phone. He's the colorful founder of Legal Karma in Austin, Texas. And he said all of these things. He essentially says that law firms operate so differently. You just have to meet them where they are, and you have to be different. He said you need to interview 50 lawyers. Don't tell them about your idea, but just find out how their firm works. He recommended a book called The Mom Test, which is probably not a PC term, but sort of suggests someone who's maybe not tech savvy, and you've got to meet them where they are with your user experience. He's emphatic that selling to law firms is completely different than any other business. Marketing does not work. Selling only works through relationships, and to form those, you have to get into the lawyers' heads. He said that lawyers do not care about tech or about being efficient, which is kind of a funny comment. They just want more clients. And he said he found this very consistent across firms. And he said that you use the attorney interviews to build the product really well and to ensure that it's what the clients want. Charles Uniman is out of South Orange, New Jersey, and he's a legal tech startup evangelist and founder and host of a startup-focused community that some of you probably heard of. He had some very useful insights about getting adoption in-house. It is critical to maximize the likelihood of actual use of a legal tech product by a law firm or legal department after celebrating the win. Too often, software becomes shelfware because users are never made aware of it or encouraged to engage with the product. After the sale, the real work has to begin, which means training in the products used, follow-up sales calls to get feedback, following up on that feedback. And he says consistent use and application of behavioral science techniques to nudge potential users to use the product. Dorna Moyni is the founder and CEO of Documate in Los Angeles. She says, start small, think big, iterate quickly. And iterating quickly requires financial runway. So it means generating some revenues and or raising money, because sometimes you have to pivot. And if you don't have money, if you run out of money, that optimization of the product to fit the market might not be possible. Think about sustainability, and she means reducing churn and customer acquisition costs as early as possible, even if, and especially if you're serving indigent clients or are going to be a nonprofit. This is still the number one consideration as to whether you will survive. Get the expertise you need before you go out and start your company. She says her time at 7 years at a law firm helped her to run her company better than any class that she could have ever taken. This gentleman from Australia was very helpful. Now, Australia, as some of you know, has very loose restrictions on legal tech. So he's in the middle of probably a pretty vibrant market. Qudus Porshafi, I think he pronounces that. He had two observations. Recognize as a legal tech startup that you are building a solution, not the solution. This means you need to recognize how important SaaS ecosystem is to adoption and your growth. You must include in your strategy how to integrate with other existing legal tech or commonly used technologies like Gmail, Slack, to be sticky. Understand your role in educating your clients versus marketing, that term marketing again. Build communities around your product. There are several ways to do this. Exceptional user experience and UI and gamification are some standout ways. And then lastly, Mir Tariq here in Seattle. He's a legal tech entrepreneur and the founder of Legal Atoms. He said usability is key for adoption, but sometimes it's hard to assess and to monitor other than by using auditing tools to track how far users get in the tool, how long they stay on certain pages, and how often they complete tasks. Secondly, he said that with consumer-facing legal tech, 90% of users are logging in from a smartphone, and this makes a mobile-first approach and technology key. He also added here that printing is a huge problem. It doesn't work. Avoid it. Thirdly, he said, avoiding the unlicensed practice of law requires using court or lawyer-approved documents, posting warnings that what is presented is not legal advice, avoiding subjective legal advice type tips, and identifying in the device, in the platform, when a lawyer should be consulted. If they say something like, I have an existing parenting plan in a family law app. And he said this, when these warnings pop up, it would be useful to facilitate attorney leads and to help book appointments in such cases. I think I'm a little bit low on time and I don't want to overtalk and crunch the last speaker's time. I have a ton of other information on generally what's covered in my book. I recommend my books, but I'm happy to talk with anyone about legal or regulatory or compliance matters, and maybe I'll take some questions and I'll stop screen sharing.
That's great. Yeah, we have only a few minutes for questions. One question I have, actually I asked myself several points, is when you're a startup and you're really early stage, you're actually mostly paying a ton for legal advice, because you're frequently in a situation where you have a big international law firm as your outside counsel. Mm-hmm. And they charge $800 to $1,000 an hour, and then and that's for sometimes very complex IP issues or fundraising rounds. But then as your company grows, your legal needs become somewhat more mundane, and you might not need the outside capabilities of the outside firm. But it might be too early for you to really insource, to create your own legal department. And so at what stage do you think it makes sense for a company? I mean, I guess that's sort of the phase where it would make sense to get a part-time GC, who like the service that you offer, who comes and gives some of his time and then manages all the legal issues and maybe sets up legal operations, and then only after you went through that phase, when you've grown more, it makes sense to actually have a full-time person and start building your legal department. At what stage do you think companies typically start their own legal departments?
That is a very interesting question. I think it depends on how regulated your environment is. That's one consideration. So if you're in a highly regulated environment, some of the work I do is fintech, financial services, health and medical. And so, in highly regulated environments, you're probably going to build a law department sooner rather than later. I think that most companies tend to lean on outside counsel pretty heavily for a couple of years. There's really no perfect model. I do think that the model I'm using, this fractional share GC, is the better model, because the fractional share GC is part of the team. And law firms are pretty good at being part of the team, but when you're actually an officer and you're kind of approaching things with a business perspective, it is a little bit different. I think it's more efficient. And I know better what corners might be cut and what things are coming up. I tend to be in every board meeting, so I'm really close to the founders, and I'm not billing by the hour, so everyone feels like they can approach me, right? And raise questions. So it is very difficult. If you can raise money quickly, you should have lawyers sooner, right? It is a matter of resources, but I think the sooner you can lawyer up, and that's kind of the question, what percentage of your resources should be dedicated? The answer is, and it can't be zero, but it can't be too much either. You can't interfere with product development and marketing and sales. So it's different for every company, and maybe just, talk to your lawyer or other lawyers and figure out, what formula is going to work best for you in each particular case.
That makes sense. Yeah. All right. And maybe the final question, and then if you could, we see your email address here actually, but Shugam's asking, hey, Paul, I'm a comp sci PhD from Iowa State University, built efeat-hungers.com. Now in the process to build a legal tech startup. What is the best way and place to look for investors?
I would say go to Crunchbase, get a 1-week free trial. Don't forget to turn it off, or it'll cost you $350. So you got a week to bang around in there and learn how to use it. And I search for, Crunchbase isn't as good for finding investors, but if you can find companies in legal tech that have taken investments, then you can drill down into those investors. You can see who's writing checks at what stages of development, seed, pre-seed, Series A, and you can identify investors that way and start developing relationships with them, and maybe develop relationships with non-competitive founders in adjacent companies that are not directly competitive, so that they can maybe make warm introductions to investors and help you sort out who would be best and what types of terms they require and that kind of thing. But starting with Crunchbase and finding companies and fellow founders that can be helpful, and developing relationships is critical. And develop your network.
I think that's a good point. And for finding fellow founders, I think the group around CodeX is a good place. And you might want to present at one of our group meetings and connect with potential investors. There's also some investors around CodeX who have their own kind of yearly kind of pitching events, and they're looking for interesting startups. So Shugam, you can also drop me an email, and I'm happy to kind of point you in.
Yeah, and I, chapters 10 through 14, maybe 10 through 15 are all about fundraising. So I don't have time to go into it right now, but there's a lot of detail in startup law and fundraising about successful fundraising and avoiding securities law violations, which can be the opposite of fundraising.
All right. On that note, Paul, if folks have more questions, I'm sure they will shoot you an email. Thank you so much for joining us. And,
thank you very much.
And please keep us posted. And if you have more questions, we'll reach out to you directly. So let me turn it over to Stu now. Thanks again, Paul. And Stu, are you there?
Yes, sir.
All right, there you are. Okay, good. All right, so we're a little bit behind time, but we might go over our 2:30 end time just to make sure that you get some time to present. And also,
Sure.
Try to keep some time for discussion. That would be great.
Yeah, absolutely. So, so my name's Stuart Farmer. I run Lambden. The context of this company is that people are becoming more and more individually sovereign. You can see that with Uber, you can see that with Grubhub, but basically people are being their own producers of capital. And so what does that really mean for us is that we want to facilitate that. So our mission is to provide anyone in the world a way to produce that capital by creating some value. And how we do that is we have an application development deployment platform. You basically create an app on this system and it's instantly monetized. Specifically what that means is we utilize blockchain technology and smart contracts. If you're familiar with this technology, there's a transaction fee for each send. It has a feedback loop so that 90% of that transaction fee is sent back to whoever made the application that you're interacting with. So yeah, what does this have to do with CodeX? The idea is that right now this is a completely global network that's running, but individual smaller networks can be started up and enterprises can utilize this software to rapidly prototype. Because it's an application development system, you can simply deploy smaller applications onto a network, have secure transactions and things like that. Oh, I guess I have a duplicate slide. Okay, I'm not sure what happened there, but basically, I'm going to show you exactly what that means by showing you the software. So if there's any sort of tech people here, you can probably follow along. Otherwise, I'll just kind of fill you in. But if you're not familiar with a smart contract, it's essentially a set of rules or a small program that has some sort of functions that you can call. So for example, if you've heard of Bitcoin, it has one application and that's to send Bitcoin to somebody else, right? And that takes the argument who you're going to send it to and the amount. We extrapolate that concept further to a scripting language, and then you write what you want to expose in this application. So it works kind of like a database driver. When you first initialize the system, it has a single smart contract, and that's to submit new smart contracts. This is all running in line in sort of this development environment, so you can integrate it with whatever your system is. The way that I create a smart contract is that I will just tag something as an exportable function. I call it something and I label its arguments, and then I return that value, right? So this one's pretty straightforward. You will then submit that to the network. And again, this can be the global network, or this can be a private deployment, say it's between a whole bunch of law firms that are, have some sort of legal agreements together, wherever. So you essentially submit that and you can pull it now out of the system and essentially call that function, and lo and behold, it's 11. So as this is applied to law, you generally have contracts, right? And it just so happens that smart contracts can be seen as legal contracts as well. So let's try to mock a very simplistic version of a legal contract, which is escrow, right? So generally in escrow, someone moves money to a lawyer. That lawyer waits for certain conditions to be made and then remits that money to another party. So in this smart contract, I defined actually two contracts. One is money. And so money essentially has something called a hash, which is a storage container, right? So my storage container is the balances of everybody. On the construction, I'm going to say, send whoever's submitting the smart contract 1 million coins. And so that'll essentially seed the distribution, but you can do this however you want. And there will be a single function, which is sending money. You supply who it's to, the amount, and it's going to make some checks. Like you can't send negative coins, and you have to have the amount of funds you're able to send. And then I will simply deduct from the storage, and I will add it to the account that I specify. And so I've made a little application right here describing money. Now for escrow, I'm going to import money. I'm going to then look at that storage contract or that storage container, and I'm going to define where that storage container is, the name of it, and I have a receiver, so that's who this escrow will be to. I have a lawyer, that's who's allowed to basically turn the escrow key. And on the construction, I'm going to assume that the lawyer is the one who's creating this escrow account. So they will be the ones who are set as the lawyer, and they set, let's say the receiver is their client, and there's a single function on here called remit. And it basically says, whoever's calling this function, they have to be equal to the lawyer. Otherwise, you kind of issue an error message. And if so, send the balance of this escrow account into the receiver. So now this is a lot more complicated than addition, right? So the workflow now has to be integrated into a normal process. Somebody sends money into that escrow. It could be anybody, just to keep it simple. That lawyer then can send it to whoever. The balance of the escrow contract is looked up, and then it's remitted to somebody else. So I'm going to go ahead and run this, and then I'll submit it. So this is just to show you guys, we submitted money first, and you can see that the system balance, which is the default sender, has the 1 million coins. All right, so just to verify it works, before I called this method, you looked up, okay, what's the balance of Stu, which is me? None. Send me 555. All right, great. Do it again, it's double. You can see the deduction in the account. So this is all working as a transaction-based system. So now let's set up the escrow. We're going to say the signer's Laura, and she's going to be our lawyer. And there's going to be a constructor argument. So on this construction, we supply who that receiver will be, and Laura's client's name is Matt. So we're going to submit this. We're going to pull it back out, and we can verify it's Matt by getting that variable. Cool. So now I'm going to send 1,000 coins into this system, and you can see that it's there. And to demonstrate the security of this, somebody who's not Laura can try to run this remit function, and it will fail. So it'll throw an error. The system will not allow that. And we can still see that the money's there. So now if Laura comes around and says, okay, these certain legal conditions were achieved, remit the money, now the money is gone and Matt has the money. So we're all good. And you can simply see how you can make it even more complex if you want. You can add those conditions inside the escrow. You can look at a different storage container and say, if the storage at this space is something, then remit, right? And you can automate it even more. And this is the building blocks of a smart contract. So I'm going to now take it and deploy it to our blockchain. So the way we do that is we will first deploy the money contract. So we have this little wallet here, and smart contracts. We'll make a new one. We're going to call this new contract. Let's see, paste it in here. Cool. Check contract. I have this. Hold on. All right, contract is okay. And let's see, submit to the network. contest money. Stamp limit is how much processing, so that should be good. Yes. Oh, all right, not enough stamps. No. Not sure why this is happening, but I'll carry on, I guess. So essentially, I didn't run this part in a mock.
Maybe a
Actually,
live demo if that wasn't an issue.
of course, right? I'll try it on test network real quick. Let's see, there's one called Stu Operations Con test money stamp 1,000 submit contract. All right. I'm not sure what that's about. I'll look at that afterwards, but we've submitted it. If we go to testnet, actually, I think it's just explorer.lambda.io. We can see that a new contract has been submitted. You can click on that submission. Here it is, contest money, life's good. And then it set the balance of the sender to that. So I can also go back here and copy the escrow account or the escrow smart contract and create a new contract, one contract, paste. Now I'm gonna have to change some of these. So this is contest money instead. So this will be contest money. Check it, should be okay. Submit to network. Let's do operations. Test escrow. I believe that this is going to be receive. And then let's pick, let's say Matt again. Cool, there we go. Now, if I were to interact with this thing, I can go to, well, first I should send some money in here. So I can, let's go down here.
I think,
yeah.
I think we sort of get the idea. I think, you know, we kind
Sure.
of.
Yeah. So now you can interact with it. As long as you guys trust me, we can kind of conclude and
it works.
Yeah.
That Shugam is raising, which I think is a very valid question, is if you want to put this into the hands of lawyers, it seems like, you know, it does still require quite some technical expertise to do that.
Totally.
And how do you I guess how do you overcome that, or how do you make it more
right?
So this,
yeah, totally. So you need to get buy-in from a lawyer, right? Like this, the system was made for developers, and so that can also box out people. But if you have someone who is savvy, then it starts to percolate. So like law is one aspect of the things we're looking at. We're also looking at health. So like collaborative records, like having your doctor update your charts and things like that. You still need buy-in from someone who's technical, but this application can be applied anywhere. I don't think you can really get around that. You just have to find that person, right? It's like the Pareto principle. You're going to chew through so many people who just can't access it, but it's new technology.
So great. Okay, so I'm just looking at some of the other questions. That's Thabo's question. I think it's a little bit along the same lines. What is the position for lawyers who do not understand the technical aspect of coding? Does it mean that lawyers must first understand the coding aspect to be able to deploy contracts using your platform? Yeah, it sounds like you need a technical translator there, I guess, between a person who has the expertise, but who can understand the additional use cases where this could be used, maybe right. Beyond escrow. Escrow seems like a good example, you know, particularly if you do this on a blockchain. But what other ways can this help in legal settings? You know, what other And so I think that's, sort of where you need the kind of legal engineers. Nonopa is saying, is it a free service or are people required to pay to use your system?
So this is the global system it is completely open, and the software is open source. Right now, it's open for a non-commercial environment. So if you want to deploy this in a commercial environment, you should talk to me so we can figure something out. But for experimentation and understanding the technology, it's completely open. You can go to GitHub, you can read the open source, you can see how it all works and all the components. And to kind of ping back onto the lawyer issue, either lawyers use it, which it might be 10 years before lawyers program, or you get a legal tech as sort of a software provider, and they deploy like an escrow feature, and they start to automate the interactions and provide the blockchain as an audit log to say, like, this is cryptographically valid that these things happen. This guy signed off on this. This was his cryptographic key. There's no way that anyone else could have signed off for this besides
Got
him.
it. Got it. Yeah, our old friend from Autonomous, Han, is saying, in addition to the above questions, our main question is why Lambda, from what it seems, created their own blockchain and token instead of using, for example, Ethereum.
Yeah. Why? I guess is the question.
Yes.
Yeah. No, I mean, I started this project, I dug into Ethereum, and I said, why is this so hard to use? What I just showed you, if you're familiar with Ethereum, cannot be done with Ethereum. They've created, they invented their own technology and their own standards for everything. So it's extremely hard to get involved. The fact that I'm able to run these smart contracts in line and you actually see output in this Jupyter notebook, it seems very simplistic and it doesn't seem like a big deal, but there's no way that you'd be able to do this with Ethereum Solidity code. So I'm not someone who is like, a lot of people will say, oh, why don't you just use X? Why don't you just use Y? I've been around this space for a long time. They are obtuse for the sake of being obtuse, and that's not helpful. So,
Got it. Dennis is saying, could I set up my own escrow service on Lambda for third parties? If so, what would be my cost? What would he pay you?
It depends if you want to do it on the public version. So if you want to do it on the public version, you would get our tokens, and that's how the system runs, right? The tokens, you saw me put in a stamp amount. That's like the amount of processing that you're allowing a transaction to do. So you can deploy, and then it's like it's a little bit. If I go back to the Explorer and we look at one of these, like stamps used 19, that'll go into, it's half a tau, and a tau is like 4 cents. So it's like 2 cents to run this transaction. So those would be your costs if you were to develop. And similarly, if you were to use another blockchain, you'd have a similar pricing scheme. Or you would deploy a private network, and then it would be like, you wouldn't necessarily have to pay for the transactions, but there'd be a licensing deal.
And so from Shugam has another question. Maybe that's the last question we have time to, so already over time. But that's, I think, also a very good question. Maybe you can transport what you do into a pure web app, hiding the technical details, so hiding more the sort of the background. Can you please talk about your investors and client base, and also your revenue model? Like how are you gonna make money from this?
Yeah, totally. So we got funding to build and deploy the public version, which is what we did. And now with this system out and about, it's time to increase attraction for commercial applications. So we're approaching companies, we're saying, look, it can solve these problems really well. And our biggest hurdle is people trying to understand the technology. So we go in and we say, this problem that your technical guys might say is extremely hard to do is actually very easy if you use this. And it's approaching those people. It's being open to partnerships. It's being honest, transparent, not necessarily wanting anything initially, so you can get the feedback and then you start to build up a track record, right? Like, for example, this weekend we are having an Ohio State hackathon, right? And so we're one of the sponsors there. We have a challenge so we can get a whole bunch of kids working on it and banging away and see what they make. And that will kind of inform us where we can go. So if someone starts to make like, oh, this type of application is really cool, or they try to do something in like insurance or something, right? That can sort of show us the way. That's more on like a, I would say, public developer sort of microcosm, but the same thing applies to corporations.
Cool. So, and okay, and so then you're gonna work with, you're gonna help corporations customize or use the system for their specific needs. That's your business model, I suppose.
Yeah, and this is the same business model that like IBM's Hyperledger takes, except we're not going to charge IBM consulting rates because we're not IBM. So, yeah.
All right. So Thabo says that's amazing, and yeah, it's very cool what you're working on. It's very interesting, and really appreciate you coming in. Appreciate Mark and Paul coming in too, and sharing all that great work. And yeah, unfortunately, we are a little bit over time already, so we have to close it. There would be so much more to discuss with all of our speakers today. And yeah, if you could, Stuart, if you just could maybe put your email address in the text so folks can reach out to you directly with additional questions. So really appreciate you all. It's great having you, and we'll see you again at the next meeting. I'm actually not sure, Susan, do we have a meeting next week?
We do. We have one more meeting before the Thanksgiving break. So we'll see everybody next week.
So, okay, so look out for an announcement early next week when we'll let you know who's coming in. And in the meantime, yeah, thanks again for joining us. Stay safe and see you next time. Thank you. Bye-bye.